And yes,
Any volunteers? No? Okay, well, if there's no volunteers, I mean, I can start it with prayer. I don't mind. Okay, let us just all pray. Let's find a position that is comfortable for us and let us go to God in prayer. God, we thank you just for another moment. We thank you for this day. We thank you for life, health, and strength. We thank you for all that are on the call today that is participating in the Black Religious Roundtable. God, continue to bless this effort as we touch lives and communities, as we enlighten those that have decided to become advocates and working in the community and working with persons who walk with HIV, but understanding and know that there is no hurdle too surmountable for your people. As we collaborate in this effort, God, give us strength, wisdom, and enlightenment. God, open our hearts and minds even for this meeting, this training session. Use your vessel, Daniel Griffin. Allow him to give us information that we can walk with so that we can change the world to be a better place. Let everybody say, amen.
Amen.
Okay. So today we have Daniel Griffin. And Daniel Griffin is going to be speaking to us about stigma. Now, Daniel has worked in the intersection of advocacy and assisting communities impacted by HIV for the past decade. And he has worked locally in Atlanta, but his voice has gone nationally. And from one of the discussions I had with him, he's traveled internationally. So he has become, his name is becoming an international name. Daniel is the creator also and senior, or was the senior advisor, Daniel, I don't know if you still are, the senior advisor for D3 Consulting, as well as which is a small consulting firm which is a consulting firm that deals with small to mid-sized community-based organizations that deal with healthcare, research and treatment, particularly for men, African-American men, and any persons who are dealing with healthcare issues, not just limited to HIV. Daniel recently served as the co-founder and director of external affairs for Thrive Support Services and advocacy and support network for Black men living with HIV. Daniel received a Bachelor of Science in biology and a master's in public health. Daniel is currently pursuing a doctoral degree in public health from Georgia State University. Daniel has also been asked to join us in this effort and currently sits on the Black Religious Roundtable board. Let us all welcome Daniel Griffin. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Hey everyone, thank you. Again, it gives me great pleasure to share virtual space with you all. As Reverend Bean read that beautiful introduction, I am Daniel Griffin. I use he, him pronouns. I've lived here in Atlanta, Georgia for the past, since 2010, so almost 14 years or so. Personally, I identify as a person living with HIV. I use that lived expertise not only in my everyday role within, activism, within leadership, but also, personally motivating and mobilizing communities to be healthiest. Outside of that work, I am also a project manager with the HIV Vaccine Trials Network. We are the largest publicly funded research network, a global research network, attempting, to do very important work as we create a HIV vaccine. Here locally, I also serve as the first vice chair of the Atlanta Ryan White HIV Planning Council. And the Planning Council provides more than $30 million any given year to take care of 16,000 people living with HIV over the 20 counties that touch Fulton, that touches Fulton. So I am embedded across the communities and ensuring that not only Black people, but any person impacted by HIV can access services, not only medical services, but most importantly, you know, those wraparound services needed to not only survive, but thrive with HIV. So I have the pleasure of speaking today about stigma and discrimination, specifically impacts on HIV risk, prevention, and care. So how the slides will be, and I'll share the slides once we are finished with today's discussion. It's a larger conversation, so we'll talk specifically thinking about risk acquisition, we'll talk about some prevention, and we'll talk about care. Please feel free to utilize the chat feature within the presentation if you have questions. I'll also have some polls, so I'll ask you to interact with the chat. For the individuals who are driving, focus in on driving first, okay? You know, as the public health person in me, focus in on driving first, and we'll catch you up once you get to where you need to be. So I'm gonna start the presentation. And let me share it. All right, can someone confirm that you can see the stigma and discrimination impacts on?
Okay, you said I can do it. Yeah, just put up your text messages.
Excellent. Thank you, guys.
Where's the plug that was in it? No, it was plugged up to West Virginia. I left it over here.
I think someone may be. Okay.
Carolyn McCrary, you're on mute.
Say, you're talking to me?
Yes, you're not on mute.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. I'm walking in the house and trying to, okay. Thank you. So sorry. Go on, soon to be Dr. Drifford.
Totally okay. So again, our discussion today. Okay, excellent. So again, during today's session, participants will explore the impacts of stigma and discrimination, specifically actualized stigma, perceived in specific status, race, socioeconomic, age, sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity, and how does it impact HIV vulnerabilities. So we're going to dive into some definitions. We'll define stigma, discrimination, and key terms. We'll dive deeper into how are the different HIV-related stigma seen. We'll talk about root causes. We'll begin to wrap up our conversation specifically when we think about the impacts of mental and behavioral health and other inequalities when we think of HIV outcomes. I'll have a case study specifically on Black sexually minority men, and I'll give you some ways on addressing stigma. So on the left-hand side of the screen, I have stigma, prejudice, and discrimination. I would love if someone can probably just unmute and tell me from 1, 2, or 3, what is the definition of stigma?
Number 2.
Number 2. So number 2 says, negative attitudes of stereotypes about people or groups of people based on personal characteristics that are devalued, rejected, or feared by society. Do we have a second backer of number 2 as the definition of stigma? Okay, I see some nods. Okay, so number 2 is correct. I like to use the working definition as seen there. So when we think about prejudice, what would be the definition for prejudice?
Number 1.
All right, number 1, attitudes of judgment or dislikes based on myths and misconceptions. Why do you say number 1?
Because looking at the difference between 1 and 2, uh, 1 and 3, excuse me, 3 is more active. When I think of prejudice, it's more mental, um, maybe not necessarily acted upon, but impressions that one has.
Got it. Thank you for that. That is correct. Thank you so very much. So by process of elimination, we define discrimination as unjust and destructive behavior adopted by persons, community, institution, or state towards people because of their affiliation or association with a certain group. These 3, I like to start the conversation with these 3 words: stigma, prejudice, and discrimination, because they go hand in hand. Specifically, when we think about the impacts of not only HIV stigma, the line may not always be well defined, so at times it could be stigma, at times it could be prejudice, at times it could be discrimination. But again, no matter the term that we're specifically talking about, it can and often does negatively impact not only, the mental being of people impacted and living with HIV, but also the anticipation. So even me thinking about, living with HIV or, potentially acquiring HIV, one can be stigmatized, okay?
Here we define important terms. Please click on the drop-down menu to
Let me
review
stop
each term
for,
and
hold
its
on a
meaning.
second.
Here we define important terms. Please click on.
Okay. So we have a snapshot of racism and anti-Black racism. I think it's important also to ground our conversation with these 2 important words, because again, oftentimes when, especially here, not only in our state, in our country and, the world, oftentimes HIV, disproportionately impact marginalized communities. Oftentimes those communities are Black and brown folks. So we have a working definition of racism being the belief or doctrine that inherent differences among various human races determine cultural or individual achievement. Specifically, usually involve the idea that one's race is superior policy or system of government based on such a doctrine. So we live in a state where roughly a third of the population identify as African American or Black. Specifically, when we think about HIV here in Georgia, close to 48 to 54%. So the majority of individuals living with HIV identify as Black. Instantly we can think and we can identify not only negative policies and negative practices that disproportionately impact those communities, and that's as a result of the onset of racism in racist ways. I like to have a quick conversation about anti-Black racism. And again, this is that furthering dehumanization or marginalizing individuals who identify as Black. This can also be the overt disregard for anti-Black institutions and policies. So what does that look like, you ask? That can look like providers, and I think someone's off mute. That can look like providers, not being mindful if, your population that you serve use public transit systems, and not, leading the conversation with, oh, even if someone shows up late, rather than just canceling their appointment, um, being able to fit them into the schedule, because oftentimes transit systems, I haven't seen a transit system yet that runs on time, but like disregarding those key facts are some anti-Black or anti-Black racism, racist policies and practices. Other things, that goes in that same conversation is being mindful of, many times people living with HIV work hourly jobs, and they may not be able to take off of work in the middle of the day to go see a provider, or, to tap into their medical care. So not having a medical home that have hours outside of your traditional banking hours, so from that 9 to 5, would also be other ways that institutions hold up policies and practices that disregard, the specific intersections of class, race, or even gender privilege.
Here we define important terms.
So these are some other key terms when we think about not only stigma, discrimination, and prejudice. So the first one is gender-based discrimination. I like to use the definition of destructive behavior, specifically adopted by a person, community, or institution towards people based on their gender identity. So that can look like when you hear those conversations that HIV is a gay disease, okay? We have homophobia next, and again, that is the irrational fear or hatred of individuals who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans-identified, queer, intersex, or asexual plus. So LGBTQIA folks. Again, that's the hatred or fear of LGBTQ people. I think most recently, this is currently in the news right now. I think within the last couple of days, an openly gay dancer outside of a gas station in New York City was stabbed to death, as a result of lived experience. Homophobia goes into transphobia. Again, that irrational fear of hatred of trans-identified persons or people who do not meet an individual's gender role expectation. Again, very, very timely conversation, not only with the, the societal conversation of cisgender individuals versus transgender individuals or trans-identified individuals. I see my sister Tori just dropped in a link within the chat specifically on Sibley O'Shea, murder as a result of voguing, again, like doing a gay dance per se at a gas station. Even, within the last 45 days, Atlanta made national news of, again, a local trans woman being murdered for no reason. So homophobia, transphobia all goes into this conversation. And finally, microaggressions. And microaggressions are everyday, subtle, intentional, and oftentimes unintentional interactions or behaviors that communicate some sort of bias towards marginalized groups. As an example, I said, yes, honey, or oh, Miss Thing. So imagine, you are in a relationship with someone who may identify as gay or, along the LGBTQ perspective. And, socially sitting in a session, you may respond to them, oh, yes, honey, or oh, Miss Thing, with a snap or something. If you do not have a deep relationship with that individual, replying like that, gesturing, those types of things, could definitely and often are oftentimes seen as microaggressions. So again, these are, those quick things that we think, are received in love and joking, but it may not always be the case. So just being mindful of some of these terms, some of these concepts, as we begin to dive deeper into our case study and how HIV discrimination is, HIV stigma is felt. Okay, so I'm going to come out the slides for a couple of seconds and just see if we have any thoughts, conversations, questions before proceeding. Okay, so let me stop share for a minute. All right, so how are we doing? Any thoughts, questions, comments so far on the slides? Okay. All right. So we'll jump back in. So this is a diagram I love to use, and it looks really complicated, but do not be afraid. Okay, so this is a framework of how stigma specifically impact not only medication use for the treatment of HIV, but also even staying connected to medical care. So at the top of the figure, let me grab some highlighters. So up here, we have the beginning of the conversation. So structural stigma. When you hear structural, think of those big drivers of life. So think of employment, think of geography, think of insurance. Oftentimes we like to group these things as social determinants of health. Okay, so think of those aspects. Think of income. Structural stigma specifically feeds into the intersecting stigma of race, class, gender, and sexuality. So no matter who we are talking about, no matter what community of individuals who are, at a perceived risk, or even, living with HIV, those folks are intersectional folks. So they have multiple pieces of their lives to make them whole. Okay, so that's their race, class, gender, sexuality. This feeds into HIV related stigma. So we like to think that there's 4 types of HIV stigma. So enacted would primarily be policies, procedures, ways of living. Community, so again, specifically across groups of individuals. So that could be local, that could be regional, that could be national or globally. Anticipated, again, anticipating or preparing yourself, to be negatively impacted and internalized. And that is stigma specifically inside of an individual. So that is a lower or a devaluing feeling as a result of HIV or something to HIV. If an individual is impacted by any one of these 4 types of stigma, it feeds into how individuals interact between people. So that's interpersonal. It could feed into, the way that we think, so psychological. It can impact mental and behavioral health, and ultimately increase stress. Okay, as you go through this level, there it begins to impact outcomes. So specifically, how does one engage in medical care? And ultimately, how many CD4 count? What's your CD4 count? So individuals who, go through a heightened stage of stigma, we definitely see a lower CD4 count, as well as a higher viral load. And we ultimately want your CD4 count to be higher and your viral load to be lower. So that's that undetectable equals untransmittable. So again, as we create ways and mechanisms to reduce stigma, we see HIV health outcomes increase or improve versus seeing it in worse situations.
Sure.
Sorry about that. So again, structural stigma are the attitudes, societies, practices, structures, services, or laws that work to the disadvantage of minority groups. At the bottom of the slide, I have, for example, HIV criminalization laws. So across many of our states, individuals who are living with HIV, if they do not directly disclose their status, someone can bring them up for charges, facing criminal charges, up to 5 to 10 years of imprisonment and a very hefty fine. And even, after one is charged, one could also be labeled as a sex offender. And the implications of those impact so many aspects of living, not only where you would have to live, where you can live, even the jobs that you hold. Other examples of structural stigma I like to highlight is thinking about organizations that may provide HIV care, rather than having, holistic care. So rather than having holistic care at an organization, they may only provide HIV care. So that's an additional way that structural stigma may impact people living with HIV. So this is the divider of thinking internal stigma versus external stigma. So again, that internal stigma would be the thoughts and feelings of shame, fear, rejection that I hold there, or that I could hold as a person impacted by HIV. So that would show up like, oh, I feel ashamed that I have HIV, or even, if I would have done X, if I would have used a condom, I wouldn't have HIV. So again, that lower sense of worth as a result of the stigma or the shame. External, of course, would be outside looking in. So these would be experiences being treated unfairly or different from everyone else. Some of the things that we've heard specifically, when we think of external stigma. So here in Atlanta, we have a very large organization that provides HIV care to more than 6,000 people living with HIV. We've heard, individuals using the transit system. We've heard bus drivers call out over the loudspeaker, the next stop is the AIDS clinic, So thinking of what that feels like, or what, thinking of having to get off of the bus before that stop or even immediately after, and those feelings of just unfair treatment. You would never pass any other organization and say, oh, that's where the people with sugar gets treated. So again, just thinking of how does external stigma show up every day of the week. And oftentimes those experiences can and oftentimes do lead to violence, specifically against people living with HIV or those persons believed to be living with HIV. Okay. We have
Stigma there are many.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. So we have some stigma can also be, experienced as a result of sexual stigma. Again, these are individuals, or this is social stigma against perceived individuals because of their, not being heterosexual. This could be beliefs, identities, or behaviors. I think one of the things that I want to, drive home within our conversation, this is a intersectional discussion, meaning stigma may not show up just based on race. Stigma may not show up based on sexuality, but it shows up at that intersecting corner. It shows up as that individual who identify as Black, gay, who identify as Black and trans, who may live, in a neighborhood that is difficult to navigate. Stigma is intersectional. In the same conversation, stigma is also experienced by individuals who specifically may not be living with HIV, but who are attempting to access HIV-related services. So I have on the last bullet is PrEP stigma, pre-exposure prophylaxis. And again, pre-exposure prophylaxis is a daily medication or bi-monthly medication that you can use to protect yourself from HIV. We oftentimes see communities of color specifically are less likely to use PrEP because their other community members stigmatizes them from wanting to protect themselves. We see that oftentimes using examples like Travado horror. But again, as a result of someone wanting to protect themselves from HIV, they experience stigma. So sorry. So we say stigma is, the root cause of stigma is, these bullets right here, judgment and blame. Stigma is rooted in, ignorance. Stigma is rooted in myths and misinformation. Stigma is also rooted and, carried out through discriminatory laws and practices, and even, different religious beliefs, ignorance, and cultural norms. So again, we have to improve the way we think about things. We have to improve the way we communicate about things to really reduce the ongoing impact of stigma across our many communities impacted by HIV. I'll drop this link in the chat, and we'll share it after the presentation, just so you can actually see the many states and the many laws across our states when we think about HIV criminalization. Here at home, specifically in Georgia, the governor actually began to modernize our HIV laws during the last legislative session, so 2022 session. The modernization conversation, truly erased some of the outdated thinking and finally brought it up to where science is meeting policy a little bit more. We have a long way to go in Georgia, and definitely a long way to go across the Deep South, but the activism of many folks here on this call and across our communities, is doing what is necessary to reduce the ongoing impact of criminalization. So we have a case study. Meet a friend named Jason. Jason is a 24-year-old man who tested positive for HIV 2 years ago. But he says believes he's been living with HIV since 18, so close to 6 years. In this scenario, you are a peer worker assigned to help Jason with some adherence issues. And again, adherence is taking your HIV medication or even your PrEP medication as prescribed. You have been seeing him for the past 7 months now. So during your most recent session, Jason shared his concerns about his increase with alcohol and drug use and depression. Specifically, over the past month, he has frequently mentioned his fear of failing his HIV medication regimen. So not, being adherent and not ultimately being virally suppressed. He's shared in conversation the thought of having to switch medication because of failing his current regimen has caused Jason to feel depressed. He has been on the current regimen for a little, for a year or so. The combination of fear of failing his HIV treatment, in addition to disappointing his doctor, has caused Jason depression to worsen. Over the past 9 months, Jason has also been concerned with his body image, okay? So again, although he works out at a gym regularly, he lifts weights, he's never satisfied with his physique. He's noticed changes in his body fat buildup throughout his body, loss of fat in the face area, and his limbs has thinned. He's also expressed concerns about effects of long-term treatment. He recently read an article specifically on HIV in a magazine that detailed some information about heart disease as another side effect of long-term treatment. Besides his cousin, Jason does not have anyone else to talk to about his HIV status, but he rarely shares with his cousin his sex life involving men that he meets at parks or in the clubs. He admits to you that he often finds extra pills in his bottle at the end of the month. He feels healthy, but ultimately, his CD4s, his T cells or his immune system is dropping and his viral load is increasing. So I want to ask the following questions. Is stigma present in this case? And someone can unmute and, give me some thoughts. So is stigma present?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So do you mean just like in the scenario in general or from the practitioner to the client, like specifically? I just want to make sure I understand the question.
Yeah, I think we can answer it both ways. I think we can answer it both ways. So how would you take a stab at it first?
So I don't know. Okay, so I want to say yes, but I don't know exactly how to clarify or explain why I want to say yes. But
We'll work it out. You have
okay.
people. You have 14 other folks on here. They will
So,
tag team it. Okay, go ahead. You start with a yes. Tell me your yes.
so yeah, so I feel like it's I don't know. I feel like there's a hesitancy to like ask the harder questions or to like do the work that what's the word that you used? Ed, it starts with an A. The person who's the practitioner was the one who was showing stigma. So I'm gonna say yes, and then I'm gonna stop talking.
Okay. Who wants to help out? What do you think? Is stigma present?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Stigma is present because he cannot even share with a person who's close to him about his life.
Absolutely.
Typically, if you're in a relationship with someone, I mean, it's common to discuss sex, it's common to discuss who you're with, it's common to discuss those kinds of things. But if he's uncomfortable discussing that with someone who's close to him, that's serious stigma.
Got it. Thank you. Who else thinks stigma is present?
I do.
Okay, give me some. Tell me some.
His body image and the way that he's looking at himself is a part of the stigma. His internal conversation, the depression, and that causing him to how he's relating with his medication and the fears around that are all parts of the inner stigma that he's under.
Absolutely. Thank you for lifting that up. Anyone else?
I was gonna agree with Amina. Inner stigma, self-stigma is definitely there. We definitely see it as present with him having to not being able to share, like Ms. Meredith said, and then also to not really being competent with his medication due to his self-image, going to the gym, not seeing the results, what he wants to look like, not fully being aware of that his body, everyone's body is different, so we're not going to look the same. So there's a lot of self-esteem there, issues and concerns that's going on there. So I definitely agree with the inner stigma towards himself.
Got it. Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. Anyone else?
I just want to make a comment. I appreciate this portion though, because when you think of stigma, you tend to think of what other people's perception of you are. Very rarely does one think of stigma as to what is self-perception, and how that affects your psyche. So this is very enlightening.
Right. And both situations are present, so it's him, being mindful of his image is changing, but also it's him perceiving, what others will think. I think we had to, it's not a stigma is bi-directional. It's multifactorial, is bi-directional. So all of those things come up. So we had like 4 other questions and you all already highlighted them. Let me drop this one for you. So what are some solutions moving forward that you would suggest, where stigma can be reduced in this situation?
I would say suggesting maybe a peer support group of his peers that may be dealing with some of those similarities that he's experiencing. Also, maybe finding a sponsor as well, someone in regards to the possible alcohol intake could possibly be something where he can have someone like accountability partner in regards to that, and having a conversation with them if he may feel tempted to indulge a little bit more. Also, let's see, I'm just kind of putting things out there. I would also say in regards to healthy sex advice, because just because we don't know if he's having protected sex or unprotected sex when he's meeting these guys in the parks or the clubs, so things like that, I think he would need some assistance on.
Got it. Thank you for that. Anyone else?
I detect a very low self-esteem in this young man. Some acceptance of self and loving of self. To be reinforced for him. And in doing that, that will help him get beyond, hopefully, the stigma that he's experiencing with not being able to talk about what's going on with him, with someone that he's close with.
Mhm.
That's not really good at all. And I think some self-love would be a healing piece for him.
Got it. Thank
to
you for
get
that.
beyond that.
Thank you for that. I think, so this situation, especially here across our city and our region, happens daily. We see this every day of the week. I think, some of the things I would also be mindful in this conversation is, self-love could be a very radical conversation, especially in these scenarios, right? We talked about he believes he's been living with HIV since 18, he's 24. What's not mentioned oftentimes in the scenario is the fact that these young men have been homeless or housing unstable since the time of 12, 13, 14. And all of, again, when we think about the intersecting nature of stigma, all of these things add on to the negative impacts. So so just being mindful of building out what does a holistic wraparound service or wraparound project look like when we're providing reduced stigma care in our populations. Amina, I see your hand is up. Go ahead, friend.
What I was thinking about is, in this scenario, we would be his peer counsel or his, peer support. And so one of the things that I think would be good for him is to be a space of listening, and to build trust. So that since he does not feel for some reason comfortable in confiding in his cousin, to create hopefully a safe space where as his peer support, he would feel comfortable to begin letting out some of the things that he's internalized, and like just really helping him to first have a space where he can get out of his head. And, just being a listening. I mean, a lot of times people first just need somebody just to hold space for them. So I think that would be a good starting point for where he is, to build the trust, by maybe asking questions and keeping engaging, even if he's closed off, to create a possibility and an opening for him to then have a space to express himself.
I love that. I think that's right on. Go ahead, Reverend Meredith.
Yeah, so I guess one I recognize is that trying to overcome stigma as well as trying to build your own sense of self-worth and self-esteem to transcend these kind of issues that block you from being your whole self and being true to yourself and comfortable is extremely difficult. It is a very, very hard process to do. But the one thing that I think helps the process is if he can, or any individual can be directed to connect with somebody that loves them for who they are, whether it's a therapist, counselor, family friend, or anything, so that they can build a sense of trust with that person. Because if they can't say to their cousin, that means there's fear and distrust there. And so how do you connect someone to an arena of trust that they can depend on someone to help them to make these connections? I mean, it's just, hell, I'm 70 years old and I still struggle with stigmas and stuff, and I'm out and open. So I know for those who don't have a system, it's just a tremendously hard thing to overcome. So I appreciate the dialogue, but I think there is something, but I just can't put my hand on what exactly or one thing that can be done.
Absolutely, sir. And you said it. It's love is the fixer of this. It's finding community. It's finding support mechanisms where you can grow to be all of yourselves. I mean, you know, we have my amazing sister Tori on this line, you know, but between Tori and Nathan, folks have created entire communities, you know, to build an individual like this back, you know, to the value that innately they hold, you know. So it's figuring out how do we replicate the same thing in each of our circles, you know. So thank you for that. That was a great exercise. I think one of the other things that, you know, we oftentimes may miss is also figuring out the best medical provider to have with folks, right? So I firmly believe if you cannot be honest and 100 with your medical provider, you need a new medical provider, okay? If you know, if you feel, oh, so and so is going to judge me if I ask this question or that question. Like, we need a new medical team, you know. So truly being able to figure out what that medical team should look like. And it doesn't always have to be, you know, a doctor. It doesn't have to be a nurse practitioner. It can be anyone in an organization who they feel comfortable with in being truthful and honest as possible. So thank you for that. So I have a couple of more slides. I just want to show some impacts. So again, this is just a quick snapshot of some impacts of stigma. So I've divided it into mental health and client behaviors. Oh, sorry about that. I've divided it into mental health and client behaviors. So, you know, trauma, abuse is often seen, isolation, loss of dignity, you know, one see themselves just as an object instead of, you know, a person and valuable. Suicide ideation goes into this conversation really, really quickly, especially when we think of, you know, the historical aspect of, you know, where HIV can be stigmatized and oftentimes is rooted too, you know. So depression and loneliness is also on this list. Again, we often see it showing up as reduced health outcomes. So when I say health outcomes, I'm specifically talking about, you know, stress, I'm talking about anxiety, I'm talking about CD4 cells, so the number of CD4 cells, even viral load. So again, you know, as stigma increases, health outcomes decrease. Okay, so we have to think of ways in which to counteract that process to ensure folks are healthiest. Okay. Again, just thinking of structural inequality, so bias and discrimination within care or within an organization. Again, organization can be community, organization can be social network, family, friends also, okay? Again, HIV outcomes are present, so they're less like individuals are less likely to use their medication. Individuals are less likely to see a provider. You know, individuals are more likely to see viral loads being higher. So as these structural inequalities persist or increase, folks are less healthy, okay? So we have another activity, and and you just do this silently, and I'll come out of the slides. So my first prompt would be, what role has stigma played in your life or someone you know? And I'll drop it into the chat as well. So, and anyone can chime in. Can you think of a time where stigma has played into your life or the life of someone that you've known?
I can share.
Please.
I'll reference myself. Stigma has played a role in my life where I've judged myself. I'll speak about body image. So judge myself based upon me viewing myself as overweight or not looking like I used to back in the day. And, so preventing me from engaging with certain people or preventing me from, going certain places because I feel, comparing myself to, all these things that are out there now, enhancements that I have not, chosen to do to myself. So I would say that that is a way that stigma has informed ways that I've first thought about myself, and then how those thoughts have dictated the way that I've interacted with others at times.
Thank you for sharing, friend. I really, really appreciate that. And again, stigma, oftentimes, it starts from some perception, something that you could perceive, something that you could see. That's one, onset of stigma. The other would be something you may not see, but innately, can discern, right? And these are things, we had to keep in mind, okay? Someone would like to share, you don't have to necessarily share the stigma, but how did it feel for you or, a friend of yours to be stigmatized as a result of something?
I guess I'll chime in on that too.
Please.
So I'm a baby boomer, so quite naturally I've had to live with stigma and sense of great senses of self-worth. I think that the religious community certainly contributed to stigmas and my sense of self-worth. And I think that the religious community has not only done that to same-sex people, I think just people in general, by the way we've interpreted our religious understandings. And so having said that, I do think that, as I said earlier, it is a very, very difficult thing to transcend, to overcome, or to move beyond that. And of course, I know several people who I can think of that I won't call their names, of course, that that live with stigma, or that that has to, they seem to live normal lives, but there's substance abuse and all those other things that they've engaged in. And finally, let me say this. I think that until you somehow or another, through whatever experience you have, until you are able to internalize the detriment of stigma through life's experiences, counts, whatever it comes, it's just something that is hard to get beyond. And so unless there is, it's kind of like people who come to terms with a drug addiction and they finally say, I'm gonna go get treatment. Until there is something there that you internalize the detriment of it and the pain of it, and you make that connection, it is an extremely difficult thing to get beyond. Just like I say, let me say in this, equated even with people who don't like their size, their body weight, the stigmas that come with that. That stuff will live with you for your whole life if that connection is not made. And so it has to be an internal personal connection. How you get there, I don't know. But I do think life experiences can bring you to that.
I don't know why they called me. They could have called you. Okay. Yes,
Oh,
you're
no, you're
okay,
doing
exactly
great.
right.
I
Okay.
mean, you've been in this for years and you're doing, let me say this one other thing. I've reconnected with this kind of work because of my ex-wife, Lydia, but I'm retired and I was involved in this in the early 2000s, all the way up until probably 2010. And what strikes me as interesting at this point, it's the same language. It's the same thing, and I've been detached from it for the last 10 years. And so when I come back, it's the same language. It's the same thing. It's almost like as African American people, we're being reconnected to Jim Crow. So it's like, I appreciate you and others who are still out there trying to help people to make to get right and to live healthier lives. But honey, this is one old mountain to climb.
We yes and yes. We're happy to have you back. Yes, we've been doing the work. It is still so much more work to do. You know, I think about our situation of creating an organization specifically for same gender loving men living with HIV because of the stigma that was present. You know, when we created Thrive Support Services, there was minimum places to go where we could see a different conversation of what it means to be living with HIV, specifically from Black gay men. You know, within our name itself, it was an anti-stigma activity, right? So Thrive Support Services stands for Transforming HIV Resentment into Victory Everlasting. So within the name itself, you know, it's peeling the multiple layers of stigma back at every step of the way, you know, and truly, you know, from starting in 2015, our first activity, I mean, and it was through word of mouth. Our first activity was a sit and chat session. 15 people were supposed to show up, but 44 people came. Like one person brought a day in Margaritaville machine. Okay, and we had margaritas and talked for what was supposed to be 30 minutes. We talked for 6 hours, you know.
Wow.
As a result of peeling the multiple layers back, you know, and as the organization, but also, you know, and I think we've talked about it personally as people living with HIV, but as we became confident, as we became more loving of our entire being, the organization grew monumentally, you know. So again, you know, it's creating the holistic aspect of how do we reduce stigma every step of the way. You know, I think I can't remember who said it in the past, but after a while of saying something, you know, you start believing it, and you know, we started to believe it. So I think that's, you know, those are examples. That's an example of, you know, how do we address stigma? It's creating, it's deciding, you know, not to be silent when you are presented with a stigmatizing situation, you know. And it doesn't have to be something as drastic or something you know, as big as creating an organization, but it starts with just communicating, you know. So if someone is in front of you, if you are in earshot of folks saying something pejorative about people living with HIV, it's, you know, turning around and saying, you know, where is that rooted? You know, why do you think that? Have you really seen that? Can you talk about something different? I don't like, you know, it's doing those types of things. You know, when it's opening up the conversation that not only people living with HIV have to steer this conversation, but it's everyone in the Hollywood boxes that's listening to me, you know, having this same stigma conversation with 3 or 4 year friends, you know, inviting folks over to a brunch. I see y'all on the TikTok and the Instagram throughout Atlanta at the brunches and stuff. But it started these conversations across our congregations. It started these conversations in places where we have the ear of our friends, of our family, of our parishioners, you know. That's the last slide. So,
So soon to be Dr. Griffith. Let me just jump in and say quickly, I am so, and let me see if I can dare to put myself on camera. I am so thankful to you all of you all, for this conversation being led by you, Dr. Griffith. I really appreciate the members as you all dealt with the holistic, the stigma conversation is so multifaceted, and I really appreciate it. And I don't want to take up too much time as to say I've been inspired by this group tonight. That's my first and last statement. And I also want to say, in reference to what you just said, soon to be Dr. Griffith, Reverend Dennis Meredith came to our class talking about being courageous and talking about doing what you can. I hope you remember coming to our class at ITC.
Yes.
And you stepped into the lion's den, so
Yeah.
to speak. Since this is an interfaith endeavor that we're doing here, that faith piece and talking about stigma, we could talk about stigma and religion
Yes.
for days and days, unfortunately.
Yes.
Unfortunately. So in such a space, Reverend Meredith, you came and you told your story. That was phenomenal. You were, I'm gonna put a little light on me. I got my head wrapped up and all that. But it opened so many eyes, and it made so many people in that class see a human being who was a loving, kind, jovial, tall, dark, handsome Black man talk about himself, his inner thoughts and feelings, and then you are a very professional person in the city. With that being said as well, it was transformative. So I'll end by saying we often don't know what telling our story and being authentic, just like some of you all did tonight that I'm just hearing. I see the name of Mina and Angela, and I heard those voices of you sharing. It's so powerful. So continue. And I applaud you all. I applaud us. And there's going to be a lot of growth from this one experience tonight. So I'm very appreciative to you, soon to be Dr. Griffith, for all that you do, all the work. You are so phenomenal.
thank you.
Amen. Ashe. Amen.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I dropped in. So my day job, the HIV Vaccine Trials Network, we actually have what we call the HVTN Faith Initiative. And our faith initiative is a national program involving faith ambassadors across the U.S. who connect to diverse faith communities. They share current evidence-based information regarding HIV vaccines and antibodies being developed and tested. But more specifically, it's an additional resource. The activity was created, was a brainchild of Bishop Edwin Sanders over in Nashville, Tennessee. Okay. So he's one of the advisors for this Compass activity, the Compass activities that we're, discussing today. It's currently being led by Ulysses Burley, his, right hand. Dr. Burley is not only, an MD, but he sits at the intersection of faith and, science. We have ambassadors, including Dr. Bambi Gaddis. If you've heard anything of public health in the Southeast, Bambi name is attached to it. Dr. Dante Morrison, he's out of Los Angeles, Khadija Abdul, and a handful of other folks, but I dropped the link in the chat. Just an additional resource, that can be used. I will also drop in my contact information. I'm always willing I could talk about anything every day of the week for hours. So, if you if you want to dive deeper, if you, want to have a more focused conversation, I'm more than happy to do that. That's my contact information. And, I'll actually open it up just for, comments, questions, thoughts. It doesn't have to make sense. Okay. This is just
Hey man, I say as I mute myself.
so I'll ask a couple of questions. Tori, what did I forget? Like what should be included that was not in a slide?
Doc, the only thing that's not included is your Cash App, because you did everything else. You covered everything else. This was fantastic. Now, I would have perhaps explained to folks the importance of viral suppression just a little more.
Okay. So I could do that. I actually am a proponent of using videos, so I'm gonna pull one up really quickly. We will do so when we mention viral suppression, we are having a conversation about specifically people living with HIV taking their HIV medication routinely, okay, or as prescribed. So as people living with HIV take their medication as prescribed, you ultimately should achieve being virally suppressed. Viral suppression is when HIV is so low in the body, laboratory testing may not be able to detect it, may not be able to count how many copies are present. In essence, the lower the amount is undetectable, it stops transmission. So you cannot transmit HIV to sexual partners once you achieve and maintain viral suppression. So in an everyday scenario, this looks like, so even for me, I'll speak on me. So I went from taking a daily HIV medication to taking an injectable every 2 months. Okay. So I went from 365 pills to getting basically 12 shots over a year. The shots maintain my viral suppression. A daily pill can maintain other folks' viral suppression. But again, as we think of viral suppression is key for people living with HIV to be healthiest, But also it is key as we think about ending the HIV epidemic across our communities. Okay, because again, once you achieve undetectable and you maintain being undetectable, transmission cannot occur. Okay, I'll drop a quick little video. And this is by Kaiser Family Foundation. They have probably 20,000 videos on HIV that are under 1 minute that are like super easy to understand. So we'll watch this one video. Gotta share sound.
I had heard about undetectable, wasn't really sure what it meant until about a year into my diagnosis.
When you're HIV undetectable, that means the virus is so low that the lab can't detect it and you can't transmit it to your partner.
As long as you're staying in touch with your healthcare provider and taking your medicine every day as prescribed, you can reach an undetectable viral load.
When I go and get my labs, they let me know that I'm still undetectable and that my CD4 count is doing well.
CD4 are the helper cells, your white blood cells that are in your body that help fight off any kind of infection.
Being undetectable makes me a little more confident about sharing my status.
Although it's not a cure for HIV, me reaching an undetectable viral load took the weight of living with HIV kind of off of me. And it let me know that I won't transmit to my partner, that I can live a long, healthy life with HIV.
So again, viral suppression is really important as we think of the larger public health conversation. So thank you for highlighting that, sister. And the name.
I'm gonna jump in. First of all, I have to say, Daniel, you did an extraordinary job. We are so appreciative of the information that you shared today. And I believe that with the information that we got today, and as we begin to develop the programs that we're going to place in our communities, it should be the most effective programs that we can come up with. I'm going to invite Daniel to also send me an email with all of your contact information. I know that you've already put it in the comment section, but if you would like to send me your contact information that I can get out to all of the cohorts, I'll do that as well. Be sure to send me your PowerPoint as well, so that I can share it with the cohort. As I did last week, I would have one question for the community, and that is, with the information that we would have heard today, how do you think that this information would help to shape what your program will now look like? Did it change your perspective at all? Has it enhanced it at all? And if so, just let us know how. Anyone? No? Okay. So thank you all for oh, I'm sorry, Amina, I didn't see your hand up. Yes, you have it.
I'm feeling very talkative today.
Yes, please do. Feel talkative.
I really am so grateful for this presentation because it helped me to view things that I'm aware of in a broader, yet more intimate perspective, if that makes sense. It helped me to branch out my knowledge about prejudices and how, you know, how things work, unfortunately, in the world that we're in. But then especially that case study I'm so grateful for that because it really personalized it. So as we move forward with our project and began to do the work and began to interface with our community, me personally, I feel like I'm going to be able to convey the spirit that was created in this presentation to the rest of our community, so that when we are sharing, we're remembering what place we're coming from, if that makes sense. So I am super grateful. Like, this is beyond what I even fathom how this, and this is only like our second, one, but it's so, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. So this is really, really amazing work. Thank you.
No, Daniel helped to, from my perspective, he just humanized it a little bit more. So we're doing this work for very good reasons. We're dealing with human beings, and I appreciate the fact that there was, I've been taking notes through the whole darn thing, and one of the words that jumped out at me was microaggressions. We tend to think of when stigma as people calling you names or attacking you physically and publicly shaming you. But there are also small ways that people can impact us with their own sort of biases and prejudices. And Pastor Meredith touched on it. And when we suffer from this, traumas, whether it be religious traumas or traumas from family, it's not something that you could just dismantle immediately. It's something that you fight with for the rest of your life. Yeah, and so not only are we fighting with the stigma, and then you have those who may not have access who are also fighting with the disease. And then on top of, fighting with self-esteem and religious trauma, and you're dealing with this physical issues, and then you beat yourself up through your own stigmatization. I mean, so it's multi-layered. And so as we are dealing with the complexity of dealing with this pandemic, is more than just a virus. It really is a spiritual, social, mental, emotional disease that we can only deal with it at a community level. So we're appreciative of it. Dr. Driffin, I'm gonna call you Dr. Driffin now, only because if Dr. McCrary calls you Dr. Driffin, then I am obligated to call you Dr. Driffin. Amen.
I'm telling everyone soon to be. I'm
Go
respect to the whole process.
The way you presented today, you are doctor in our minds. So we appreciate that. Well, you all do not want to miss next week. Next week is talking about incorporating faith, values, and spirituality into community programming. And we know Dr. Meredith, I know you're going to be here next week because you got something to say. And we want you here. And Dr. McCrary, we're looking forward to you being here. We're looking forward to all of you being here. Thank you so much. This is awesome. Thank you for being a part of the Black Religious Roundtable and this effort and its movement. This is historical. Somehow we can make it truly historical, and we're going to tell the world. All right. Thank you so much. And all of you have a tremendous, Thank you. Have a tremendous evening.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Asante sana, sana, sana.
Yes.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Amen and ashe.
Amen.